The automatic doors slid open. A man in a worn jacket, cap pulled low, quietly stepped into the supermarket like any other customer. But no one knew. This was Johnson Wade, 60 years old, chairman and founder of the Johnson's Market chain. And in the very first seconds, he witnessed a scene he would never forget. A young female cashier stood behind the register, wiping away tears. Why would someone cry right in the middle of a shift? Why did no one in the store dare to step closer to comfort her? And why would a manager walk out, throw cold threats at her in front of customers, and then leave as if nothing had happened? The old boss stood silently in the aisle, pretending to reach for a can, but in his mind there was only one question. What had turned the brainchild he built with his bare hands into a place where people were crushed by silence and fear? Have you ever wondered, if a CEO truly saw what was happening behind those doors every day, would they still believe the stable reports sitting on their desk? Today's story is not just another disguise. It is a journey to uncover the hidden truth, a confrontation between power and dignity, between numbers on paper and real tears. And the ending. Not everyone is ready. Because it will forever change the way you look at one simple word in the workplace: fairness. Stay until the end. Because when Johnson Wade takes off that old cap and reveals who he really is, the entire store, and maybe even you, will never see things the same way again. Back then, the name Johnson's Market was once a source of pride, a brand that began from a small store where a young Johnson Wade used to wipe down the counters himself, stack the shelves, and smile at every customer. His philosophy was simple: when you treat employees with kindness, they will pass that kindness on to customers. That very philosophy helped him build an entire chain of 18 branches, hundreds of loyal employees, and thousands of trusting customers. But in recent months, strange signs began to appear. Customers started complaining more often: empty shelves, missing products, and indifferent staff. The internal reports, however, reassured him. Everything is fine, just a few lazy individuals. Regional managers brushed it off as well. Young employees these days always complain. If you listen to every word, nothing would ever get done. And then an anonymous envelope reached his hands. No logo, no signature, just a few trembling lines. Someone in your store is being pushed to the edge. Look again, before it's too late. To many, it would have been just another complaint. But for someone who once stood behind the register like Johnson, he knew the difference. That voice wasn't a complaint. It was a cry for help. He understood well. When a few employees complain, it might be a coincidence. But when an entire team falls silent, heads down, then something inside has surely begun to rot. From the moment he read that letter, doubt turned into obsession. Had the philosophy he built his entire life on been betrayed inside the very system bearing his name? Had Johnson's Market somewhere along the way become a place without respect, without trust? That question haunted him through sleepless nights. And this morning, he chose to walk into the store as a nobody, to find the answer for himself. The glass doors closed behind him. Johnson Wade stood still for a moment, as if to breathe in the air inside. But instead of the smell of freshly baked bread or the laughter of familiar customers like before, all he found was a strange silence. The shelves were scattered, gaps showing like missing teeth. A promotion sign leaned crookedly against a trash bin, no one bothering to lift it. An onion rolled across the tiled floor, its dry skin brittle, as if forgotten long ago. He bent down to pick it up, then looked around for someone to hand it to, but there was no one. Customers moved slowly, no greetings, no small talk. They passed by like shadows, buying what they needed and disappearing. Not a single employee offered a word. At the dairy section, the price tag was hanging sideways, a few cartons already gone, leaving behind an ugly, empty space. At the bakery counter, only a few torn bags lay abandoned. He stopped at register number 4. Cassie, a woman with hastily tied hair, eyes red from tears, was forcing a smile at the customers. Her hand trembled slightly as she handed out the receipt. Johnson pretended to study the canned goods on the nearby shelf, but his eyes never left her. Her thank you sounded mechanical, devoid of life. A young worker stumbled over a wooden pallet and let out a faint groan. No one asked if he was all right. He simply kept his head down, stacking boxes as if he had no right to complain. An elderly customer stood waiting at the service counter for nearly 3 minutes, yet no staff came to help. In the frozen section, a girl strained to reach up and paste a new label, her shoulders trembling from exhaustion, breathing so heavily it looked as though one more effort would break her. Every gaze here looked the same, weary, resigned. No words were spoken, but Johnson saw what no report had ever revealed. An entire team had stopped believing their work still had meaning. His fists tightened inside the pockets of his coat. This was no longer just a poorly run store. This was a place where collective trust had died out. And he knew, if this was allowed to continue, Johnson's market would not only lose customers, it would lose its soul. The sound of the scanners faded as the shift slipped into break time. Johnson quietly bought a granola bar from the vending machine, pretending to pass by the break room. He only meant to take a quick glance, but as he drew closer, his steps froze. From inside came the muffled sound of sobs. Then Cassie's voice, broken, each word slicing the air like a blade. "I can't take it anymore. I've tried, but it's never enough. This week my hours were cut. I don't have enough money for gas. My rent is overdue." A heavy silence. Then a young man's voice trembled into the room, honest but afraid. Johnson recognized him as the skinny worker from the frozen section. "Aldrich is targeting you too. Anyone with kids or anyone who needs time off gets punished." Cassie choked on her words. "My son had an asthma attack and he had to be rushed to the hospital. I begged to swap shifts, but he said I wasn't reliable. I didn't ask off because I was lazy. I just wanted to save my child." Johnson stood frozen in the hallway. He had once thought going undercover was about verifying data, but in this moment, every word Cassie spoke cut straight into his heart. The company that bore his name was suffocating its own people. It was already dark when Cassie stepped outside. Johnson followed quietly at a distance. The parking lot flickered under uneven neon lights. Cassie walked toward an old sedan, paint-chipped, windows patched with tape. She opened her wallet, flipping through papers. An electric bill, a small photograph, a few coins. She turned it upside down, and the coins scattered across the cement. Cassie stared at them, then covered her face and collapsed by the car, sobbing without restraint. Johnson stood beneath the shadow of a tree, his silhouette stretching across the concrete. For the first time in all his years of leadership, he wasn't thinking about expense reports or KPIs. All he saw was an employee, a mother, broken by the very system he once believed was fair. The night wind slipped through his thin coat, but he didn't feel cold, only heavy, so heavy. And in that moment, he knew he could not leave until he uncovered the whole truth. Tomorrow, he would return, not to investigate, but to protect. The next morning, before the sun had fully risen, Johnson Wade returned to Johnson's Market, no longer in the worn jacket that had hidden his identity as chairman, but in the faded green uniform of a new hire. Pinned to his chest was a small plastic tag, "Dan, probationary staff." No one noticed, no greetings. He quietly took a stock cart and was assigned to the dry goods section. There, a young man with glasses sliding down his nose and slightly messy hair looked up at him. "Welcome, rookie. I'm Marcus. Don't ask why no one talks here. Just stay quiet and you'll have fewer problems." Johnson gave a faint smile. This one was sharp, quick to notice, a few words but accurate. Together, he and Marcus stacked cereal boxes onto the shelves. While working, Johnson asked softly, "How long have you been here?" 2 years. But this heavy atmosphere, it only started a few weeks ago. Marcus glanced around, then lowered his voice further. "Aldrich's tightening control over shifts. Anyone with kids, anyone who ever asked for time off, they're all pushed onto the non-priority list. The ones who stay silent, heads down, get more hours." Johnson set a box of cookies down on the cart a little too hard, forcing himself to stay calm. Those words matched exactly what he had heard from Cassie the night before. "And Cassie?" he asked casually, eyes fixed on the rows of instant noodles. Marcus let out a long sigh. "She's the hardest worker here. But ever since her son was hospitalized with asthma, Aldrich labeled her as unreliable. Her weekly hours dropped to less than 15. Rent, medicine for her kid. How's she supposed to manage that?" Johnson swallowed hard. The numbers that had once crossed his desk, 32 hours, then 24, then 15, they weren't staff optimization as the managers had reported. They were the downward curve of a family being suffocated day by day. and he had signed off on it without even realizing. Marcus kept stacking boxes, his voice sinking lower. "You know, none of us here dare speak up. Say one word, and your shifts vanish the next week." "Who can survive that?" Johnson looked at the thin young man, then down the empty aisle, a team gasping for air, not because they were lazy, but because the system had reduced them to numbers. And he felt it clearly. This truth had to be exposed at its very root. The evening shift ended, staff swapped out, and the hallway grew quiet. Johnson Wade waited carefully for that precise handover moment before heading toward the small back room, the manager's office where the internal computer sat. He logged in using a technician's account he still kept for emergencies. The screen booted slowly, its pale blue glow washing across his face. Words appeared. Johnson's Market, internal schedule system. He typed the name Cassie Owens. A chart appeared, week by week, day by day. The downward slope was undeniable. First month, 32 hours per week. The next month, 24 hours. Recently, 15 hours. This week, only 9 hours. Beside it glared a cold note, unreliable, not a priority for scheduling. Johnson's hands tightened on the keyboard. This wasn't an error. This was a sentence written in advance for a mother. He entered the name Marcus. The same pattern appeared, steadily shrinking hours with the same rigid remark. Linda. Jorge. Every weary face he had seen on the floor shared the same fate. Then he searched a few other names, the ones often seen alongside Aldrich. The opposite. Hours stable, even slightly increased. The picture was clear. Aldrich had turned scheduling into a weapon of control, rewarding silence, punishing those with families, or the courage to speak. Sweat gathered on Johnson's forehead, though the room was cool. On the screen before him was no longer just data. It was the lifeline of an entire team, drained for the sake of optimized costs. He shut off the monitor, his reflection staring back from the frosted glass. And in those eyes, Johnson saw one truth. If he didn't act now, the system he had built over a lifetime would continue to be twisted by hands like Aldrich's into a machine that crushed human beings. The manager's office still carried the smell of stale coffee and cheap cologne. Johnson Wade knocked 3 times on the door. A hoarse voice called out, "Come in." Aldrich looked up from a stack of papers with dark circles under his eyes, but a glint of arrogance still there. He glanced at Johnson as if at a probationary worker. "What is it? Night shift not done yet?" Johnson stepped inside, his voice low but steady. "I heard a few people mention Cassie. Her shifts have been cut down almost completely." "Is that true?" Aldrich scoffed, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "Cassie? She's a walking problem. Always whining, always using her kid as an excuse. I need people who follow orders, not sob stories." Johnson held his gaze, forcing down the surge of anger. "But if her son was hospitalized for an asthma attack and she informed you in advance—" "Listen," Aldrich cut him off, his voice dropping, sharp as ice. "This is a job, not a charity. I run on discipline. Anyone who misses a shift, anyone who shows weakness, I cut their hours. Simple. And you know what? The regional boss loves it. My reports always look clean. Labor hours down, costs down, profit steady. That's what matters. Not a few tears at the register." His words landed heavy as stone. Johnson felt his chest tighten, but his face remained still. Aldrich had no idea the man in front of him wasn't some new hire, but the founder of the very system he was corrupting. Aldrich went on with a trace of pride. "All we need are numbers, not emotions. That's the fastest way up. I'm guessing you're still young. You wouldn't understand." Johnson stayed silent for a long beat. In that silence, he understood. This wasn't rigidity. It was calculated cruelty. He turned, walked out without another word, but in his mind, one sentence was carved deep. "Tomorrow, I will return. No more shadows, no more false names. I will return with the badge shining on my chest." Night had fallen, and outside the window of the small hotel, only yellow streetlights spilled across the wet pavement. Johnson Wade sat alone at an old wooden table, a cup of tea long gone cold before him. On the table, he spread out hastily scribbled notes, cut hours, employee names, every sign of exhaustion he had witnessed. Each number was not just data. It was a fragment of a life. Cassie, from 32 hours down to 9. Marcus, carrying endless night shifts. Linda, trapped in mismatched schedules that kept her from caring for her child. He circled each name in red, and in the center, 2 words stood out: Cassie Owens. Outside, traffic thinned, but his mind did not. It carried him back to the days of his youth, when he himself had stood behind the produce counter, hands frozen stiff, still forcing a smile for customers. Back then, he had made a vow: if I ever own my own store, no one there will be treated with disrespect. But now, the name Johnson's Market was being twisted into a symbol of coldness, even cruelty. Aldrich had turned work schedules into a blade, and the fault did not lie with him alone. It also lay in Johnson's own silence. He lifted his eyes to the mirror, meeting the face of a 60-year-old man, time-worn but still carrying a spark in his gaze. He whispered, "Enough. Tomorrow I won't hide behind that old cap anymore. I will return, with my real name, with the badge shining, to reclaim the promise I once made to myself." He turned off the light, but within him another light had been lit, clear, unwavering. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall glass doors of Johnson's Market. No more faded jacket, no more cap pulled low over his eyes. Johnson Wade walked in wearing a fitted gray suit, a pale blue tie, and on his chest, a gleaming metal badge, Chief Executive Officer. The atmosphere in the store froze. The beeping of scanners, the rustling of plastic bags, all seemed to slow. A few employees recognized him instantly, eyes widening, lips whispering, "That's him, the chairman, the owner himself." Cassie stood at register number 4, a customer's item still in her hand. She looked up and met Johnson's gaze. Her heart clenched, her hand trembled slightly, but this time it wasn't from fear. Johnson strode straight toward the service counter where Aldrich was hunched over the schedule board, coffee cup in hand. The sound of leather shoes echoed evenly across the tile, reverberating in the silence. A shadow stopped directly in front of him. Aldrich looked up, frowning at the unfamiliar figure. "What do you need?" "Good morning." Johnson's voice rang out, deep and steady, steel wrapped in velvet. Aldrich's brow furrowed. "Who are you?" Slowly, Johnson reached into his inner pocket and drew out a gleaming badge, lifting it to Aldrich's eye level. Johnson Wade, Chief Executive Officer. The coffee cup in Aldrich's hand froze, trembling slightly. You're... Yes, Johnson answered firmly. The one who has heard, who has seen, and who is now here to speak directly with the manager of this store. Whispers rippled across the floor. Employees stopped in their tracks, customers paused mid-step, and every eye was fixed on one point. Cassie stood motionless, her eyes red, but now burning with hope. Johnson stepped closer, lowering his voice, every word landing like a hammer. "We need to talk about how you've treated my people." Aldrich staggered half a step back, his face paling. For the first time, he had no quick excuse to cling to. The store was crowded, yet silent as stone. Aldrich tried to hold himself steady, but his hand trembled, his eyes darting as if searching for an escape. "Mr. Wade, there must be some misunderstanding," he stammered, voice strained. "I only followed policy to keep the store running smoothly. Labor costs are a huge pressure, and I—" "Cutting the hours of a mother whose child suffers from asthma," Johnson interrupted, voice firm as iron. "You call that running smoothly? You turned scheduling into shackles, punishing anyone who dared to breathe outside your command. That's not management. That's intimidation." The air seemed to drop a degree colder. Marcus, stacking boxes at the far end, quietly set one down. Linda stopped wiping the counter, eyes locked on Aldrich. Cassie held her breath behind the scanner. Aldrich tried to force a laugh, but it twisted awkwardly. I was only optimizing for the regional reports. The regional boss is very pleased. I thought..." "Enough!" Johnson's voice cut through, decisive. He extended his hand, palm open. "You no longer have the right to run this place. I am here to reclaim what you never deserved to hold." Aldrich froze. For a fleeting second, he hoped someone, anyone, would stand by him. But all around, there were only cold stares. No nods. No steps forward. Cornered, he slowly pulled the ring of keys from his belt, the metal clinking as they rattled together. His heavy hand placed them into Johnson's. "You're making a big mistake," Aldrich muttered. "These people, they just want to be coddled. None of them really wants to work." Johnson tightened his grip on the keys, his eyes locked forward. "They have been working in silence, under a weight you've never known. My only mistake was allowing you to turn the name Johnson's Market into a mask for cruelty." He turned, raising the keys high, his voice steady but commanding. "Everyone, in 5 minutes, meet me in the break room. We will speak directly, no more through intermediaries." Employees exchanged glances. Then, one by one, they set aside their tasks and followed the call. For the first time in many months, they felt light breaking open, right there, inside their own familiar store. The break room, usually cramped, was now packed wall to wall. Old shelves, scratched plastic tables, a few folding chairs creaking under weight. None of it mattered. Every eye was fixed forward, where Johnson Wade stood tall, badge gleaming on his chest. There was no podium, no microphone. He simply placed the ring of keys Aldrich had handed over onto the table, letting the metal strike with a sharp, final sound. "My friends," Johnson began, his voice low but steady, "I am the founder of Johnson's Market, and I have failed in the most important way. By allowing the people here, the people who keep this store alive every single day, to be treated without respect." The room was stone silent. Linda clenched her hands, Marcus stared down, and Cassie leaned against the wall, her gaze unsteady. "I have seen, I have heard," Johnson continued. "Cassie's hours were cut when her son was sick. Marcus was forced into endless night shifts. Linda is stuck with rotating schedules that keep her from her family. And instead of being supported, you were labeled unreliable, not a priority." He paused, drawing in a long breath. "The fault isn't only Aldrich's, it's mine too, for letting reports blind me from reality, for trusting numbers instead of trusting people." A faint stir ran through the room. A sigh rose from the back. "From today, that ends. This store will run differently, not by fear, but by trust." He turned toward Cassie. She startled, her eyes locking with his, unflinching. "Cassie Owens," Johnson said, his voice warm yet resolute. "I want you to step up as assistant manager, not out of pity, but because you've proven true strength, standing tall when everything around you tried to knock you down." The break room buzzed. Some exchanged glances. A few nodded softly. Others wept quietly. Cassie shook her head slightly, her voice trembling. I was written up. They said I was weak. I even cried in front of customers." Johnson gave a gentle smile, but his eyes held firm. "And yet, you came back. You worked. You treated customers with respect. You carried others' weight. That is not a weakness. That is strength." Cassie fell silent. In that moment, the whole room seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Finally, she inhaled deeply and gave a slow, steady nod. "If you believe in me, I'll do it." Applause broke out, not thunderous, but solid, steady, like the heartbeat of a team rediscovering life. Johnson nodded slightly, his voice lowering but glowing with warmth. "We begin again, today." The office door closed behind Cassie, leaving behind an unfamiliar silence. No more footsteps pounding the floor, no more clipboards slamming down. Only the faint smell of stale coffee and an old swivel chair with its leather peeling in patches. Cassie sat down, her back resting lightly against the chair. The wheels creaked under her weight, a reminder that this was once Aldrich's seat. In front of her, the computer screen still glowed, the schedule packed tight with tangled numbers. She moved the cursor, opening each line. Linda, 10 p.m., 6 a.m., 5 nights in a row. Jorge, finished at 10 p.m., back again at 7 a.m. the next morning. Cassie, only a few scattered slots marked with the cold note, not a priority. Cassie pressed her lips together. Her chest felt heavy, but not with fear anymore. Now it was something clearer, responsibility. She opened a new page in the system and wiped the old data clean. The cursor blinked like an empty space waiting to be rewritten. Line by line, her words appeared. Firm, deliberate. Prioritize morning shifts for single mothers. Limit consecutive night shifts to no more than 3. Anyone with school, children, or special circumstances must be informed in advance. No sudden cuts. Any complaints about scheduling? Come directly to me. My door is always open. Each click was like a hammer sealing shut the old door Aldrich had built. No more punishment through scheduling, only arrangements that let everyone breathe. Cassie saved the file, then opened a drawer. Inside was Aldrich's red notebook, pages crowded with harsh notes. Cut Linda's shifts, complains too much. Cassie, task race, trouble. Jorge, no priority slots. She flipped through a few pages, then closed it and set it aside on the desk, a relic of the past. From another drawer, she pulled out a blank sheet of paper and taped it to the wall just above the monitor. In bold letters, steady and unshakable, she wrote, "Schedules exist to support, not to punish." Midday light streamed through the window, washing over the new words. Cassie sat quietly for a moment, then smiled softly. Not a smile of victory, but the smile of someone who had just laid the first stone for a new bridge. Outside employees moved about as always, but for the first time in weeks, their footsteps no longer dragged. At the end of the afternoon shift, a notification lit up on every employee's phone. Team meeting in the break room in 5 minutes. Sender, Cassie Owens. The room, once used to Aldrich's shouting, was now packed again, but there was no sound of clipboard slamming. Instead, only a taut silence. Many eyes turned toward Cassie as she stood at the front, hands still dusted with flour from arranging the bakery shelves. She drew in a deep breath. Her voice trembled, but it was clear. "These past weeks, I know you've all endured too much, and so have I. I once thought staying silent was the only way to survive. I kept my head down, letting injustice repeat itself." The room held still. Marcus stood in the back, eyes lowered. Linda folded her arms, lips pressed tight. Cassie swallowed hard and continued, "But I was wrong. Wrong to think endurance was the only path. I'm sorry for not standing with you sooner. Sorry for not speaking up when I should have." A sigh escaped from a corner of the room. Then a quiet nod. Cassie lifted the white sheet of paper she had just written in the office, holding it up for all to see. "Starting today, shifts will no longer be punishment. This is the new principle. Schedules exist to support, not to punish." Her gaze swept the room. "If anyone feels treated unfairly, if I schedule wrong, come to me. Or, if needed, go directly to Mr. Johnson Wade. No more detours, no more hiding." The atmosphere shifted, subtle but undeniable. A few faces lifted. Marcus scratched his head, hesitant, but the corners of his mouth tugged into a smile he hadn't believed possible. Linda closed her eyes briefly, then opened them with a softer look. Applause broke out, scattered at first, then gathering in rhythm. Not loud, not dramatic, just the sound of a team finally exhaling after weeks of being held down. Cassie blinked, eyes glistening, but her closing words rang firm. "We begin again, here. No one will be left behind." The meeting ended, and people quietly filed out. But this time, their shoulders no longer sagged. Their steps were lighter, slower, like a store that had finally learned how to breathe again. People slowly dispersed after the meeting. Soft murmurs, the rustle of plastic bags, but the heavy, suffocating air was gone. Cassie stood by the break room door, eyes following each person as they passed. She was looking for one face. At the end of the hallway, Marcus was pushing a box toward the storeroom. His thin shoulders hunched, gaze lowered, moving with the quiet habit of someone used to living unseen. "Marcus," Cassie called, her voice gentle but steady. He froze, turned his head, surprise flickering across his face. "Is something wrong?" Cassie walked over and stopped in front of him. "Today I saw you helping Linda guide the new staff. Very patient, very clear." Marcus scratched his head, giving an awkward smile. I just did it because I was there. I'm not good with people. Aldrich always said I wasn't fit to face customers." Cassie looked straight at him, her tone calm but firm. "He also once said I wasn't reliable. And he was wrong. I've seen the way you speak to coworkers. Slow, patient. That's exactly what customers need." Marcus blinked, silent for a few seconds. The familiar doubt crossed his face, but he was shaken by the sincerity in Cassie's voice. "I want you to try working the register," Cassie continued. "Not today, but starting tomorrow, I'll train you myself. You have the qualities. And I believe you can do it." In that moment, Marcus's shoulders trembled slightly. Then he nodded, slow but certain. If you think I can, I'll try." Casey smiled, not a polite smile, but one of recognition. "Not if. I know you can. You just need to believe it too." Marcus gripped the edge of the box tightly, then let go, exhaling a long breath. And in his eyes, for the first time, a small spark appeared. the spark of someone who finally believed they had been seen. Just a few days later, the atmosphere inside Johnson's Market was completely different. Not a miracle, but small changes had begun to ripple through every corner. One morning, an elderly woman with silver hair stood confused in the frozen section, eyes darting to find a price tag. In the past, she would have waited in vain, but today, Marcus quietly approached, resting his hand gently on her cart. "Can I help you find what you need, ma'am?" The woman looked up, surprised, then smiled. "It's been a long time since an employee asked me that." At the fruit counter, Linda was stacking apples into trays. Her lips hummed softly along with the background music, a sound no one had heard in weeks. A passing customer paused, pleasantly surprised that friendliness had returned. Cassie moved from aisle to aisle, no longer shrinking away from eye contact. She spoke first, with customers, with colleagues, straightened the fallen promotion sign. Her eyes no longer existed just to hide tears, but to observe, to listen. One young worker unexpectedly helped a mother with her baby all the way to the parking lot. Another, without being told, propped up a toppled sign blown down by the wind. Simple gestures, but it was precisely these small things that made the difference. At the end of the hallway, Johnson Wade stood silently. No clipboard, no need for notes. He simply observed, and he knew. Real change wasn't written in reports. It lived in the brightened eyes, the lighter steps, the way people began to care for one another again. Customers noticed too. "This store feels different these days," a man remarked after Marcus guided him to the right aisle. A nurse finishing her night shift smiled when Linda asked, "Was your shift tough?" Johnson quietly left his corner of observation, stepping out the doors before anyone noticed, because to him the true sign of a leader doing his job right was this: to be able to walk away and know the place would run better than it did before. A week passed. At midday, Johnson Wade returned to Johnson's Market unannounced. No entourage, no secretary, just a pale blue shirt, his jacket draped over his shoulder. He walked through the glass doors, along the aisles that once were cluttered with disorganized goods and vacant stairs. Now, the shelves stood in neat rows, products fully stocked, the tiled floor gleaming. But more important than all of that, the atmosphere had changed. Right at the entrance, Marcus was helping an elderly woman load bags into her cart. He bowed slightly, speaking softly. "I wish you a good day, ma'am." The woman smiled. Her eyes lit with surprise and quiet gratitude. At checkout lane number 3, Linda was cheerfully chatting with a regular customer, her hands moving skillfully, but without hurry. For the first time in months, her smile was genuine, because she wanted to smile. And at register number 4, Cassie crouched down, handing a bear-shaped sticker to a little girl fussing at her mother's side. The young mother exhaled in relief, smiling her thanks. Cassie looked up, and her eyes met Johnson's from across the floor. She froze for just a second, then smiled and nodded in greeting. Johnson remained still, not stepping forward right away. He simply observed. Every small detail struck him: a young employee fixing a fallen promotion sign on his own, another escorting a customer all the way to their car. The entire store ran smoothly now, free from the heavy shadow that had once hung over it. He let out a long breath. This time it carried no weight. When Cassie came closer, she spoke softly, voice still a little hesitant, yet proud. "I never thought things would change this quickly." Johnson smiled, answering slowly. "That wasn't because of me. It was because of you, and everyone who chose to stand up." Cassie lowered her head, smiling faintly. "I'm still afraid. There were days I almost gave up." "But you didn't," Johnson said. "And that's what made the difference." In that moment, amid the passing customers, the faint background music, two people stood facing each other. A founder who had once fallen to the blindness of reports, and an employee who had once broken down in tears at the register. Now they stood side by side, not as boss and staff, but as two links holding the entire chain of stores alive again. The office door closed behind Cassie. No more smell of stale coffee, no sharp sting of Aldrich's cologne, no cold pressure filling the air. Now the room was quiet. The last light of day slipping through the old plastic blinds, painting pale golden streaks across the desk. Cassie sat in the swivel chair, her hand brushing over the worn surface of the desk. She didn't turn on the computer. Instead, she pulled a blank sheet of paper from the drawer, tore a strip of tape, and fixed it to the wall right above the screen. She picked up a pen and wrote slowly, each letter firm, though her hand still trembled. Schedules exist to support, not to punish. She paused, staring at the words, then continued. Listen first. Adjust after. Every shift is a part of someone's life. Never let anyone cry from fear of losing their job. Good people don't need control, only trust. Each sentence was a vow, an anchor to keep her from ever forgetting what had happened. Cassie sat still, eyes fixed on the paper on the wall. Her reflection shimmered in the steel cabinet mirror. Hair neatly tied, uniform pressed, her gaze still tired, but no longer the gaze of someone trembling behind a register. This time, it was the gaze of someone who knew exactly how she would lead. She smiled faintly, not because of a new title, not because of recognition, but because in this room, once filled with pressure, she had just planted a seed of hope. Tomorrow, employees would walk into this office, and instead of Aldrich's red notes of punishment, they would see Cassie's handwritten pledge, and they would know. From now on, they were no longer alone. At the end of the day, the glass doors of Johnson's Market slid shut behind the last customer. The soft beep of the automatic system echoed briefly. Then the store eased into rest mode. Warm yellow lights dimmed, casting a gentle glow across the floor, so different from the gloom of the past weeks. Cassie stood at checkout lane number 4, the place where her hands had once trembled and her tears had fallen uncontrollably. Now, those same hands rested steady on the counter. She let her eyes wander across the aisles. Marcus was patiently guiding a new employee through the process of inventory. His voice wasn't loud, but it was steady, warm. Linda folded her uniform neatly, smiling softly before waving goodbye to the group. A young worker helped an elderly customer push her cart to the parking lot. In the far corner, a promotion board that the wind had knocked over was already propped back upright. No reminders needed. No longer the tense silence. Not yet full of noise and laughter either. But this atmosphere, Cassie felt it clearly, was peace. A kind of peace that let people take a deep breath and believe there was a reason to return tomorrow. Cassie inhaled, then switched off the light at register number 4. In that moment, she remembered the look in Johnson Wade's eyes when he placed his trust in her that morning. Not pity, but recognition. She pulled the glass door closed behind her. Outside, the night wind was cool. On her way home, she stopped at the familiar gas station. Her worn wallet opened, but this time, not with trembling coins. She pulled out a bill, enough to fill the tank. In the rearview mirror, her young son slept soundly. Cassie smiled faintly, not because of a new title, but because she had chosen not to give up. And for the first time in many months, the future was no longer a vague fear, but a door is slowly opening. The lights of Johnson's Market slowly faded, leaving only pale yellow beams cast from the sign outside. Cassie stepped out with her son, the door closing softly behind them. Her shadow dissolved into the night, but her smile lingered. A warm, steady voiceover rose. Sometimes, changing an entire system doesn't begin with a strategy meeting or a financial report. It begins with a single tear, shed behind a register. Cassie once broke down in the middle of a shift, but the next morning, she came back. That quiet strength made Johnson Wade realize no metric is worth more than human dignity. A shift is not just hours on a schedule. It is a family's meal, a child's medicine, the belief that this work matters. And no one should have to cry from the fear of losing that. The screen dimmed to black. White words appeared slowly. Sometimes, the strongest person is the one who has fallen, but still chooses to rise again. The voice dropped lower, almost a whisper. If you see yourself in this story, leave a single dot in the comments. It's not just a signal to us. It's your way of telling the world, I am here and I am still standing. The screen turned fully black. The logo appeared, simple, then faded away.